Hi, if you're watching this video, you probably understand what I'm saying. But why is that? What is it about the specific sequence of sounds that are coming out of my mouth that make a sentence that is both understandable and grammatically correct to your ears? Today, I want to bring you on a whirlwind tour through the vast field of linguistics and study just exactly how meaning can arise from sounds in sentences. But before we begin, I need to do a little bit of exposition. You see, in linguistics, there are broadly four fields of study. Phonology, the study of sounds. Morphology, the study of words and how they're made up. Syntax, the study of sentences and sentence structures. And semantics, the study of meaning. Unfortunately, semantics is a little bit outside the scope of today's video, so we won't be able to cover it. But if you listen very carefully, you might be able to notice that semantics comes up more than you expect. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Let's talk about sounds. Since most languages in the world communicate primarily using speech, and while yes, there are sign languages, we won't be talking about them today. It's therefore important to study exactly what sound inventory a language has to be able to analyze it properly. Now, since all unsigned languages in the world communicate using sounds produced by the human vocal tract, we use phonetics as a way of studying exactly what these sounds are. Here I have a diagram of the human vocal tract. By moving, constricting, and relaxing different parts of it, I can produce a continuum of different vowel sounds and consonant sounds. I can move my tongue, I can move my teeth, I can move my lips, I can even move my epiglottis, if you know what that is. Now, I, as a human with a functional vocal tract, can produce some of these sounds. For example, why not have a voiced alveolar sibilant fricative, z, or maybe a post-aspirated, post-labialized, voiceless dental plosive, tw. I can also produce a bunch of different vowel sounds, like an open mid-front rounded vowel, I know, save your applause. Collectively, these sounds are known as phones. Alright, so we've talked a bit about phonetics. Now it's time to get into the meat of the subject, phonology. Whereas phonetics studies phones, phonology studies phonemes. And the key difference here is that where a phone is an abstract representation of a sound that the human vocal tract can make, t, b, h, for example, a phoneme is contextual. It lies entirely within a language, and in particular, swapping two phonemes makes words different, if and only if the phonemes themselves are different. To contextualize that, here's an example in English. Tuck and stuck. Phonemically, these two sounds are identical. They're the t sound, or t if you like. But if you were listening carefully, tuck, stuck, you might notice that there's a slight phonetic difference. That's right, the top one, t, 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 is aspirated, and the bottom one, st, 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 is unaspirated. In particular, we say that the realization of this t phoneme is aspirated when it comes in the environment of being at the beginning of a word, to become tuck. Otherwise, it's unaspirated, stuck. Sort of like how a bunch of different frequencies on the piano would be called the same note, C. So we've looked at sounds, and we can see how positions in a word or phrase can make them vary differently, and how it's extremely important to pay attention to that. So let's take a closer look at these words and phrases and figure out exactly how their form and structure can change the meaning. Sorry about that. Me accidentally dropped this papers. That was wrong, but why? I mean, you probably understood what I was trying to say there. So what was it about the sentence that makes it sound so wrong, so ungrammatical to an English speaker? To find out exactly what the problem is, we'll have to take a closer look at words, phrases, sentences, and how they're made up structurally. Let's start with the simplest, words. In linguistics, a word is made up of morphemes, which is the smallest meaningful unit of language. So here's an example. The word incomplete is made up of two morphemes, in and complete. Since complete makes sense on its own, we can call it the root. And since in doesn't make sense on its own in this context, we call it an affix, which carries the meaning of something like not. Now, depending on where in a word an affix comes, it can either be a prefix, a suffix, or rarely in English, even an infix. Like the phonemes we were talking about earlier, morphemes can also change their realization depending on where in a word they come. A simple example of this is the plural affix in English. Now hold on a second, you might say. Isn't the plural affix just adding an S to the end of the word? Well, yes, in most cases, but we can't forget about the hundreds of irregular plurals that English has. Here are 4 examples of where plurals differ phonologically. Cats, dogs, oxen, and sheep. If you remember our earlier term allophones, which represents sounds that were the same phonemically but different phonetically, you might correctly guess that these are known as allomorphs. When we're analysing a word morphologically, linguists like to say, okay, we'll call this word its part of speech, and any other additional information depending on the part of speech. This might sound random to you, but this is because when 2 words agree in exactly these attributes, they can be freely swapped without changing the grammaticality, the grammatical correctness of the sentence. In the sentence, the birds are flying, birds can be analysed as a noun that takes an S plural, and can therefore be swapped by any other noun that takes an S plural, like the planes are flying, or the notebooks are flying. In this third case, it's important to remember that we don't care about the meaning of the sentence, only whether or not it's grammatically correct. In a similar vein, we couldn't say things like, the fish are flying, as fish does not take an S plural, or the sits are flying, as sit is not a noun. So, okay, that explains, in part, why my earlier sentence was wrong. But what about this one? Whoops, I accidentally papered the dropped. That's clearly wrong as well, but no, if we think about it morphologically, all of the words I said were conjugated correctly. They were in the same part of speech. They had all the correct cases, all the correct inflections. So why was it wrong? Well, I'm sure you're bursting to say the right answer. Oh, the words were clearly in the wrong order. And that's exactly it. We need also to think about syntax. Syntax, broadly speaking, is the study of how words and phrases combine to make grammatical sentences. When we're analysing a sentence syntactically, we tend to categorize words and phrases into the grammatical role that they play in a sentence. Here's an example. The man runs. We can break this up into its constituents, as known in syntax. The man forms a noun phrase, and runs forms a verb phrase. As shown by the square brackets, this is exactly what its constituents are. Now, obviously, linguists are going to trifle with such facetious sentences. They're obviously going to be analysing all sorts of weird, wacky sentences with tons of interplay, and they've developed various theories to deal with this. One such theory is phrase structure grammar, which was introduced by Noam Chomsky in his early theory of transformative grammar. Take a look at the sentence, the dog eats an apple. We can break it into its constituents like this, as shown by the square brackets. And then we can build a syntax tree, which looks like this. Now, I know this looks a bit scary, but let me walk you through it. All this is saying is that the sentence above is made up of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. The noun phrase is made up of a determiner and a noun, the dog, and the verb phrase is made up of a verb, eats, and a second noun phrase, which is made up of a second determiner and a second noun, an apple. This looks really weird, but actually, it's things like this and other sorts of similar theories that let us analyze sentences at a fundamental level and show us exactly what the interplay between word and phrase is and how they can combine to make a sentence that makes sense. And I think that's pretty cool. Language is used by virtually everyone in the world, and by learning linguistics, we can learn to approach these matters with a more inquisitive and open mind. I hope you found this an interesting introduction to linguistics, and whether your next step is writing a speech, learning a foreign tongue, or even making music, it's never too late to start thinking more deeply about the language we all use.